Hello, this is our Sunday School lesson review. This week we went through several chapters. We went through Joshua chapter 11, 12, 13, and 14. And so this video will be a review of those chapters. The action moves pretty quick in these chapters. The previous chapters where we've had the Battle of Ai, we've had the Battle of Jericho, we've had the five kings led by the king of Jerusalem come against Israel in chapter 10. And then that basically, excuse me, in chapter 10 concludes the southern campaign or the southern capture, or the capture of the southern areas of Canaan. And so we get to chapter 11 and we read about another king, King Jabin of Hazor, and he, knowing what has happened with the southern portion of the land, he gathers a coalition of kings together to come against Jerusalem, or to come against Israel. And essentially, the first half or so of chapter 11 is just the mentioning of the different cities that the Hebrews were able to conquer. Obviously, once again, they were able to conquer this because of the help of the Lord and the leading of the Lord. So, throughout these battles, we don't hear or read of any Hebrew being killed or harmed. In fact, the only people of the Hebrews that we hear and know that were harmed or killed was the 36 in the first battle of Ai. And again, that was because of the sin of Achan. And so throughout all these battles and throughout taking the entirety of the Canaan land, only 36 of the Hebrews have died. And again, all that because of the sin of one man. And so chapter 11 is essentially the summation of the conquest in the northern region of, or the northern half, perhaps would be a better way, of Canaan. And then the last portion of chapter 11, beginning in verse 16, gives the summary of the entirety of the conquest. And we see here in chapter 11, verse 23, it says, Joshua took the whole land according to all that the Lord had said unto Moses, and Joshua gave it for an inheritance unto Israel according to their divisions. And then essentially, from most of the rest of the book of Joshua is the dividing up of the land to the tribes of Israel. And so we see here that the land has been conquered. Now, there were pockets in the land that had not been conquered. Generally speaking, the land had been, as we see in chapter 11, verse 23. But toward the beginning of chapter 13, we see that a listing of places that had not yet been fully conquered. That was going to be up to the individual tribes of those areas to drive out the heathen from their land. And so in a general sense, yes, the land was overtaken. But in a specific, literal sense, there were still some areas that had not yet been taken. Chapter 12 is the description of the different kings that had been overtaken. And if you look at chapter 12, verse 24, it says that there were 31 kings. I liken these kings mainly to mayors, what we would call a mayor today. They weren't necessarily a king reigning over a large area. They were basically just the head of the cities that they were from. And so we see here that there were 31 mentioned throughout chapter 12. And also is mentioned the land and the kings that were conquered on the east side of the Jordan River when the Hebrews were being led by Moses when they came into the land of Ammon and Moab from the wandering of the wilderness. And so chapter 12, again, is just a summation of the different names of the different kings that have been conquered. Chapter 13, it says here in verse 1 that Joshua is old and well stricken in years. And it says that the land has been taken and it was time to be possessed. It gives a list of the different peoples that were in the land and those that have been conquered. All of them essentially being conquered except the Gibeonites, who were the ones that made peace with the Hebrews back in chapter 9 or so. And it lists the entirety of the land. As I told the Sunday school class Sunday, there's probably nothing in, and I got to be careful how I say this, but there's really nothing in chapters 11, 12, or 13 that's going to make you a spiritual giant. It's not really going to affect your spiritual walk with the Lord. But the details that are mentioned here are important to God, and they are important for the history of the world. Also, the details that are listed in these chapters give us the ability to have a book of maps made that are able to help guide in other areas of study. And so the details that are given here of where the boundaries of these tribes are to live leads us to having the maps in the back of your Bibles, and obviously I have a book of Bible maps here. But these details that are given, while not will take you on a higher spiritual plane, will definitely be a help and an assist when you are trying to study further in the different areas and the different peoples of the day. And so don't ever discount the fact that, well, this really isn't important, because it's in there for a reason, and a lot of it has to do with things that you may be studying later on. And so chapter 13 essentially is the listing of the divisions of the area on the east side of the Jordan River. Again, given to Reuben, Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh. That's the instructions in chapter 13. Chapter 14 begins the division of the lands on the west side of the Jordan for the 9.5 tribes remaining. But we read about yeah, we do read about Joshua, but we read about Caleb here in chapter 14. Chapter 14 it is beginning the division of land to the rest, but we specifically come to Caleb here. If you remember, Caleb and Joshua were 2 of the 12 spies that came back to Moses in Numbers chapter 13 and 14 with the faith in God that they could take the land. The other 10 spies were not. They made the hearts of the people melt there in Kadesh Barnea, and because of the disbelief of the people, God allowed them, or God made them, to wander in the wilderness for 40 years until all of them died off, all of them that were 20 years old or older at that point. And so it's been 45 some years as we get the indication from Caleb on how old he is in verse 10 of chapter 14, that he is 85 years old. And he also says that he was 40 years old when they spied out Kadesh Barnea and Canaan land back in Numbers chapter 13 and 14. And so it's been 45 years. The land has been conquered. The land has been overtaken and does now belong to the Hebrews. As I mentioned to the Sunday school class, it would have been easy for Caleb to have sat back and as soon as they crossed the Jordan River said, hey, I want to go take my city. I want to take my inheritance. The city of Hebron had been promised to Caleb. It could have been easy for Caleb to have went and asked for his inheritance right at the first. But no, he waited until the appropriate time when the land was totally conquered and went and asked of Joshua to have his inheritance. And so it showed great faith on Caleb's part that he remembered what God had promised him back in Numbers chapter 14 or so. He remembered that, and 45 years he waited patiently to take his inheritance. And essentially the first portion of chapter 14 is Caleb asking for his inheritance. Again, not getting in line first, not getting a demanding that he has his above everybody else, but the fact was he waited patiently. He waited 45 years. And essentially, I suppose you could say that he waited until the entirety of the land was conquered, 5 years. He could have easily asked for it even after the southern portion of Canaan was conquered in the first year or two. So Caleb shows great faith. He shows great patience. And it is mentioned that he's 85 years old. He is as strong at 85 as he was at 40, as it's mentioned in verse 11. And Caleb realized, he's not going to live to be 600 years old. And so I believe that here at 85 years old, Caleb probably only has maybe 40 years left. Maybe, I'm just guessing. I'm not for sure how old he was when he died. But it could have been easy for Caleb to have asked for his inheritance 5 years early. But he waited patiently with the people of God. And once the work was done, that's when Caleb asked for his inheritance. And so the rest of that chapter 14, it's a very short chapter, is basically Caleb getting his inheritance and getting the what God had promised to him way back in Numbers chapter 14, some 45 years prior to this. And so basically what we have here is a review of the land being conquered and the beginning of the division of the land to the tribes. So that is a review of Joshua 11, 12, 13, and 14. I thank you for watching. I pray you've been blessed, and I hope you have a good day. Thank you.